He told Jonathan Swan nothing has changed in terms of his testimony in 2017. Also on his testimony in 2017, he did say that President Trump did not know in advance of any Trump Tower meeting. So under oath.
In other words, Lanny Davis confirmed that the stuff in the dossier was fake. Nonetheless,
by mistake, I'm sure.
The president of the Lanny took a look and he said, that's just not right, because I checked with my client and he wasn't there. Meanwhile, the president was on this program yesterday at this time, and in one of the sound bites that Ainsley got from him, here was his observation about what would happen if he were impeached.
I don't know how you can impeach somebody who's done a great job. I'll tell you what, if I ever got impeached, I think the market would crash. I think everybody would be very poor, because without this thinking, you would see numbers that you wouldn't believe in reverse.
So the message is, if there's impeachment, if you like your life, it's going to go away, because people will be poor because there would be an impeachment. Brian, you're absolutely right. The more people talk about impeachment, the more of a silver bullet it is to the Republican Party, because it energizes the Republicans. They go, look, I like the way the election turned out. I don't like what they're doing to him. I'm going to go and I'm going to vote in the midterms, which is generally an election that a lot of people don't vote in.
And it's a good message, because what would happen if the president was impeached? Where would he's been a pretty good steward of the economy. No one can deny that. Who will take charge of the economy? Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. And now the Democrat Party is talking so openly about socialism. That's the direction we would go, not, I think, what the American people want.
What you're seeing is a group of people in this country that do not want President Trump to be elected. If Robert Mueller was really fair and balanced, he said, I'm going to look for Russian collusion, and when I see something that's wrong, I'm going to ferret it out. Paul Manafort, go try him for something unrelated. We're going Michael Cohen. I guess see some indiscretions here, so off-ramp him. Well, when you're looking, did you look to see who paid for the dossier? Did you look about Fusion GPS? Did you see where it was listed in the Hillary Clinton camp? Did you see some inequity in the way both cases were looked at? If he wanted to galvanize the country to believe the investigation was fair, he'd be doing that. But it's only going one direction for stuff that happened before this president was even a candidate for president.
So the more people talk impeachment, the more it riles up the Republicans.
Absolutely. And that was the concern the Republicans had in going into the midterms, is the economy's good. Could they get their base out to vote? This will help.
A secondary issue. All right. Meanwhile, 12 minutes after the top of the hour.
Democrats focused on Michael Cohen pleading guilty to campaign finance violations. But one of Hillary Clinton's former advisors says she is the one who broke the law. Mark Penn
yesterday. An ex-NSA contractor to spend 63 months in jail over classified information. Gee, this is small potatoes compared to what Hillary Clinton did. So unfair, Jeff, talking to the Attorney General. Double standard. Well, Hillary Clinton advisor Mark Penn joins us right now. He's written an op-ed, and he's might as well react to what we're seeing right here. Mr. Penn, you say that there's a double standard that has been applied to Hillary Clinton and to the president.
Well, look, I think everybody sees that a double standard occurred here, that the investigations related to the email were handled with kid gloves, and the investigations related to Trump, handled with, let's say, all-out prosecutorial force of government and deep state might. And everybody sees how these two things were handled differently.
Yeah, I was reading this morning. I do believe I read that while Mr. Comey made the case, look, we looked through all of her emails. There were 700,000 of them, apparently. Apparently, they only looked at 3,000. So there does seem to be a different standard. But, Mark, why is that?
Well, look, I can't say why, because I don't know the motivations. The important thing now is that this has real relevance to American politics. I don't care if they would have given them both light treatments, but to give one, particularly the newly elected president, from day one, this kind of scrutiny of all his campaign aides, of all his associates, and basically looking for crimes so that they could flip them. Look what happened here with Cohen. They found several $1 million of tax problems with Cohen, and they got him to plead to crimes that I don't even think were crimes when it comes to election law.
Right. And the news this morning, the tabloids here in New York and elsewhere, it's all about how sounds like the guy who runs the National Enquirer is getting an immunity deal so that he can kind of connect some dots about were there any capture and kill situations that could have been campaign violations.
Well, and you see, he's the person actually making the contribution or expenditure, and so they're not really interested in that. They're only interested in tying things to Trump on matters that we already decided. Look, I went through impeachment with President Clinton. These issues about what happened with women, if they're consensual and legal activities, can't be turned into crimes, and the American people won't stand for that. Same thing with John Edwards, who was acquitted, and the FEC ruled these things were not campaign violations, they're personal expenditures.
Well, if there weren't a double standard, I mean, look what Jeff Sessions said yesterday. He said there should be, I'm running the department, there should be never political consideration. If that's the case, there shouldn't be a double standard.
Well, look here. There's about $130,000 that went to Stormy Daniels, October 27th, would never have been reported before the election anyway, so the whole thing is immaterial. And you have millions of dollars spent by the Democratic law firm incorrectly reported as legal research when in fact it went to ultimate beneficiaries of GPS fusion and a foreign spy. That was covered up, and yet they do nothing about that. Now, look, either say both of these are civil matters, or both of these got to get the same investigation.
Let's see what happens. Mark Penn, always a pleasure. Have a good weekend.
From multiple sharp force injuries. How horrific. Her alleged murderer, Christian Rivera, is an illegal immigrant, but his lawyer claims President Trump has no business getting involved.
He's brought himself into it, and I think that people are buying into the concepts and notions that Mr. Trump is bringing forward. And at this stage in the process, it's not proper.
Really? Amali's funeral is scheduled for Sunday in Iowa. And a vintage warplane crashes and bursts into flames. And somehow, and thankfully, the pilot survives the Korean War jet slamming into the ground as it tried to land at an airport over in Minnesota. Two witnesses jumping a fence and pulling the pilot to safety. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, expected to survive. The cause of the crash is under investigation. And that's what's happening.
Plus more, the media meltdown over President Trump continues. Take a look at this Time magazine cover showing the president, it looks like he's in over his head, drowning in the Oval Office with the headline, "In Deep."
But is the media itself drowning in its bias?
Here to weigh in is Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert Cartoon and the author of Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. Scott, it's so exciting to have you here. I'm a big fan of your show. I actually brought my cup so we could have a simultaneous sip as you do at the start of your show, but it seems like you don't have a cup of coffee with you.
No, I'm traveling without coffee.
I'll
it's
take
tragic.
one for you. So you said recently, by the way, you were on Twitter, and you said that you judge the president as you would judge your plumber. What do you mean by that?
Well, if my plumber has some personal problems, but he fixes my pipe, I'm okay with my plumber. And likewise, I don't think anybody voted for the president for a role model. I've never even heard of that. I've never heard of anybody say, you know, I really thought he was going to be my role model for all elements of my life, and my children wouldn't need me anymore, and I don't even need to be a parent. I'll just turn on the TV and let them look at the president. But I don't think anybody thought that when they voted for him. So at least his supporters are not disappointed in anything as long as the economy is good and the world is ticking along okay.
Suddenly, POTUS can stand for Plumber of the United States of America. Hey, Scott, let me ask you this, though. What did you make, as a guy who's drawn a million cartoons in his life, and the visual display, what did you think of that Time magazine display with the 3 images of Donald Trump over his head, apparently on the verge of drowning, in deep?
Well, in terms of imagery, it's really great. But you notice we're in this 2 completely different realities now. In one reality, the president keeps violating all these things which are not actual laws. So, for example, there was a collusion that isn't illegal, the obstruction that didn't happen, the meeting at the tower that wasn't illegal, and now the payments to Stormy that are totally illegal. So part of the country believes that he's a serial lawbreaker. The other side sees absolutely nothing happening. And I usually apply what I call the Bigfoot test to those 2 realities, which is, two hunters go into the forest,
Right.
and they come back, and one of them says, "We talked to Bigfoot," and the other hunter says, "I was with you the whole time. I didn't see Bigfoot." Which one of them is crazy?
Right.
Well, it's usually the one who's seeing stuff that isn't there, and there are at least 4 crimes that the people on CNN can see completely clearly, just as well as they can see Bigfoot in the forest, and the rest of them, and Alan Dershowitz, who seems to know a lot about the law, looks at it and goes, "I don't see any crime here."
Yeah.
Right, and also just take it one step further. If the rest of the Bigfoot's family was paid off not to say that they saw Bigfoot in the woods, because everybody in and around President Trump is under siege. Meanwhile, Carl Bernstein gets thrilled every time the president's under siege because they dust him off, wheel him out so he can equate it to Watergate. Let's listen.
What we're seeing is worse than Watergate. What we're seeing now is the egregious conduct of the man who was the President of the United States with no regard for the rule of law before he was president, in his campaign, or as President of the United States.
What a deal he's got. He could stay in New York and doesn't have to walk into the studio, even though their studio's in New York. So it's worse than Watergate. He said that like 500 times already.
Yeah, every time the president is accused of something that sounds bad when you first hear it, I get worried until Carl comes on and says it's worse than Watergate, and I go, "Oh, phew."